Hi, my friend, Caleb Johnson here, and I have a huge question to ask you, real estate investors. How would you rate your level of personal discipline on a scale of 1 to 10? If your answer is anything less than a 10, I've got something neat for you. And let me tell you, discipline means pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone and doing things that are difficult and sometimes boring. Achieving massive success requires you to do those difficult things. Building your levels of personal discipline is not easy, but it does pay off. In fact, you can't achieve anything significant without discipline. Now, I just released a program for investors where I walk with you as an accountability coach to aid you stay on track so you can push yourself to do the hard things that greatness is going to require of you. Starting is easy. Go to redccapitalgroup.com and click accountability coaching at the top right of the screen. So let's get to work, and now to the interview. Hello, everyone. My name is Caleb Johnson, host of From Trial to Triumph. This is a show where I speak with people who have gone through tremendous trials and have come out triumphant. And even if you don't have the same story as our guest does today, that's okay, because you can still learn from their learning lessons and apply them to your life. And I'll do my best to bring those lessons into full view. So with that, our guest today is Rustin Rossello. Rustin is one of Scottsdale Bible Church's teaching pastors and campus pastor. He has a passion for teaching God's word, helping others find freedom in Christ, and developing future leaders. Rustin has an undergraduate degree in business from Arizona State University and a Master of Arts degree in Biblical and Theological Studies from Phoenix Seminary. And Rustin has, and his wife, who have been married since 2007, have 2 children. So, Rustin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, Rustin, and I guess to start off, if you can just share with our listeners a little bit about your testimony and just your history.
Yeah, so my consistent joke is I took a very circuitous path into what I'm doing today. So this is kind of the most consistent response I get to what are you doing now? I'm a pastor is, wow, really? And so this is the last thing I ever thought I'd be doing, but here's kind of the road that led me there. I did grow up in church, and I grew up here in Arizona, down in Tempe, and I walked through life really wanting to please God at a young age. I think as a lot of kids do, because it's one of the ways that they really feel like they're doing their part. I experienced trauma early in my life. I was molested at 5 years old. Kind of, as it would be for any kid, was a pretty confusing time. I didn't talk to anybody about it. I think is statistically normal for kids. Doesn't mean it's good, but it's statistically holds pretty true that that's a majority of what happens to young kids. And I just walked through life with a great deal of fear, and people pleasing really became my outlet for trying to be okay, or to find some way of being okay. I hung around in church. I was very involved until probably about 17 years old. I finally got to the point where I couldn't really knit together in the midst of my understanding of God, which was, it was mine, but it wasn't necessarily healthy. I couldn't figure out how to do relationship with him. I do really well, and you're pleased with me, and I do poorly, and boy, you kind of hate me at that point. That's really where you're at. Which isn't accurate. That's not the loving God of the Bible as I've come to know him. And so about 17, I was like, you know what? You guys are stupid. I think I got this figured out. And so I kind of walked away from church, as many have done. And I had the bold strategy and mentality of, I got this. And so I took to the world and hit it pretty hard for about a decade, college and high school and all these things. And I lived and ran real hard. In the midst of running pretty hard, I came to a point in kind of tail into college where I was running wild in Old Town, and kind of sleeping wherever I fell, drinking myself to sleep each night. And I met a woman who ended up being a super sweet Christian gal, where we meet all super sweet Christian gals in a hole in the wall tequila bar in Old Town Scottsdale. And so we were serving together and at the Salty Senorita, and boy, she was everything I'd ever dreamed of. But it was really scary because I was kind of done with Christian women, not because they were the problem, but because I was the problem and could never figure out how to get along with them despite many years of dating them. And so I was like, well, you guys are probably the problem. I got this figured out.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, I kind of, despite any logic, I started to fall in love with this super sweet, loving, kind, patient woman named Jaime. And, I was a train wreck at the time. So we dated for 6 months, got engaged, and were married 6 months later because me keeping the wheels on the train wasn't going to happen for very long. And it was kind of no sooner had we gotten married, then the wheels started to really come off for me. And it was as soon as our honeymoon, where she was going to bed alone while I was up till 3 a.m. drinking and gambling with strangers on a cruise ship. And it kind of began a trend of the first 2.5 years of our marriage where, I would get overwhelmed. It became very apparent to me that I was not going to be very good at being a husband. And so I think a lot of men carry that shame. I was carrying it at a pretty extreme level because I wasn't just having small failures. I really was in no way, shape, or form reflecting Christ to my wife, which wasn't even my concern at the time. I was trying to basically reflect even a moderate human husband, much less the God of the universe as he's asked us to do to our wives in the Bible. So as I walked through it, it was just obvious. Like the shame was just so overwhelming and it was just such a mess. And so I just got to the point where it was like, yeah, this has gotten really bad. So last 8 months of me drinking was really me drinking myself to sleep every night, her crying herself to sleep every night. And she started to pray a pretty bold prayer in October of 2008. Obviously, we've done all this in hindsight. But she said, God, I want you to either change his heart or get me out of this marriage. And
Wow.
It was a desperate prayer, but ended up changing my life. And so the next 8 straight months, I didn't realize this, but I actually had a bit of an epiphany somewhere along the way where around that exact same time in my life, she was praying that prayer and I had a moment. I would start drinking every day at lunch and I had a job that not that they were cool with that, but they didn't really notice or that wasn't really off limits. And so I was driving home one day and I had, a full-blown God shot. And it was this. I'm not in control anymore. Like, I'm not at the wheel of this drinking thing anymore. Alcohol's really at the wheel, and I'm along for the ride. Like, I'm kind of in the back seat as a passenger at this point. Whatever alcohol really wants to do, we're doing.
Wow.
And so it just got really, really hard because, again, I'm drinking myself to sleep every night. She's crying herself to sleep every night. So you fast forward till June, things are pretty bad, but I'm unaware of it. She actually stops bugging me. She stops picking at me. She stops trying to change me. She's like, okay, Lord, he's all yours. And it was almost as if the Lord went, now that you're over here, Rustin, I'm going to let you go. I had no idea how much the Lord was restraining my drinking until he let go. And then for those 8 months, we drank how I wanted to drink with no restraint. And it took 8 months for me to land just completely broken. So the night where everything really came to a head, I had gotten smart enough that driving wasn't a good idea for me after I'd gotten started because of how much I drank. So I would move social circles through my life, meaning as one group was starting to wear out, I would sort of figure that out and text some friends, hey, why don't you guys meet me up here? This group would leave, we'd pay the tab. Hey, I'm going to stay behind and finish a drink. Next group rolled in.
Wow.
Same thing. Next group rolled in. So as an alcoholic, we are crafty. We are crafty people, and we deal with alcohol, which is cunning, baffling, and powerful. And so I had gotten really, really good at doing that. So big night out, starts at, later than it normally did. I didn't get going crazy early that day. But by 10 o'clock, I had my norm, which was between 20 and 30 drinks. And so I made the decision, jumped in the car, had a bunch of people with us. We went back to my house. And everybody started to party, and I ended up sleeping with one of the women that was there that night, who was not my wife. And I'd been running so hard for so long, I had calloused my heart to the point where, I that wasn't something I really felt at the time. It's not something that had happened before, but I didn't feel it in the moment. And I woke up the next morning, the place where I kind of really remember having memory, because there was a lot of blackouts in the night before. I can distinctly remember making a decision to cheat on my wife. I can remember making a decision that this wasn't going to be a big deal and people did this. So I take full responsibility for all of what happened that evening. But there were parts of the evening I could not account for, the drive home being one of them. And so by the time we kind of got into it, I woke up on the bathroom floor the next morning was really where I came to. And probably certainly the first, but one of the bigger miracles the Lord has ever worked in my life is he took the callus off my heart right then and there. So what I woke up into was not what I went to sleep in.
Mm-hmm.
And the calluses of a decade of running from God had been completely stripped away. And I had to take what was the tender, kind of soft heart of sweet little Rustin Rossello, who grew up at Grace Community Church. And I now had to face who I'd become without the calluses. And it was a devastating moment. I could not live with who I had become. And so we had to start walking that out. And I had a couple of profound moments in the next in the next 72 hours. One of them was this. I had this experience from church growing up that was, I'm not totally sure I know how to do life with God. And I got 10 years of evidence that I don't know how to do life without God. Mm. And so I think I'm kind of just done doing life. And we did this suicidal wrestling match on the floor. I did not have any doubt that eternity with Christ was where I was going. I just had no desire to do any more of finite life here on earth. And so it was kind of a, Jesus, I want to come home. I don't want to be here anymore. And that was a big shift for me. I made it through the weekend. I was a train wreck. My wife came home. Obviously, she was out of town. And she came home, and the pain was so great. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. And so I got up real early on Monday morning. Everything happened on Friday night. My wife came home like Saturday evening. It was just a disaster. And I got up that morning. I lied to my wife. I said, I'm going to a Bible study that somebody invited me to. I went to my office and I just started to figure out, we got to figure out a plan. And I couldn't. So I just Googled Scottsdale AA. There was a meeting starting in 15 minutes just down the street. And I looked at my keys and I went, you're either going to grab those and you're going to change something or this is going to kill you. And I grabbed my keys. I drove to an AA meeting. I walked in. I was terrified. You know, they do all the preamble stuff and they ask the very scary question, is this anybody's first AA meeting? Mm. And from the back of the room, just terrified, I raised my hand. And they said, well, did you drink today? And I said, no, I haven't had anything to drink since Friday night. And they said, well, come up and get a 24-hour chip. And they hand me this crappy plastic chip. And I stuffed it in my pocket. We got done with the meeting. I barely remember it other than the fact that they asked me, why are you here? And I said, I have the life I've always dreamed of, and I'm about to lose it because of alcohol. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, we kind of walked it out. Meeting got over, and I walked out, and some guy came up. I actually just saw him at a meeting yesterday. And he came up to me, and he said, he goes, hey, we'll see you tomorrow. And I said, oh, like church mentality. Is this not like a once a week thing? Mm-hmm. And he goes, no. He goes, well, I don't know. How often did you drink? And I said, I drink every day. And he goes, we'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, shoot. How am I going to hide this? Like, I can't hide a 7 a.m. meeting every day and just tell my wife, yeah, I'm just gone. So I'm like, okay, I don't know how to handle that. So I walked out. I got this, piece of plastic in my pocket that I don't know what to do with. And that afternoon at like 1 p.m, my wife walked into my office. And as she walked into my office, she closed the door and she said, something happened and you're going to tell me what it is right now. Okay. All right. And so that was sort of what began kind of the toughest conversation that I would ever have. And we sat there and I said, okay, well, I lied to you this morning. I didn't go to a Bible study like I told you I did. I went to an AA meeting and I'm an alcoholic. And I had never said it out loud. Mm-hmm. And it was when I said it that I went, that's 100% true. I am absolutely an alcoholic. And the next thing she said crushed me. Rustin, I'm so proud of you. And it was like, oh, gosh. That's a lot. And so what happened next was I just simply said to her, hey, before you go getting all proud of me, let's talk about what me being an alcoholic has looked like for the last 2.5 years of our marriage. And it felt like 10 years, but it didn't take more than probably 5 minutes for her to say, have you ever cheated on me? Mm. And I said, yeah, I have. And I lied about the details. I was like, it was a while ago, and I'm still trying to hold together my little ideal of what my life should look like. And I looked at her and I said, you should leave. And for whatever reason, this came back to my head. I just said, I don't know what this is going to look like to get me sober, but I've been a disaster as a husband up to now. And the Bible tells you that you have everything you need to leave. And you should run from me because you've been an amazing wife and I've been a terrible terrible husband. And that was sort of where we kind of began. And what happened over the next 2 minutes changed my life forever. She looked at me and she said, hey, where do you want me to go? You're all I have. And she said, I don't know what we'll look like when this is over, but we're going to get you healthy and we're going to get through this. And I had, honestly, Caleb, I had a profound moment in that the Lord moved so profoundly through my wife, because here was my revelation. Because of what happened to me as a kid and a bunch of other things, I really had this experience of, I don't think God owes me. I wouldn't have ever told you that what I was doing wasn't sinful, but I probably would have come up with some version of, yeah, but God knows why I am the way I am. And he's not happy with it, but he loves me. So like, I kind of understood grace. Mm-hmm. What I didn't understand was unmerited love and forgiveness. And in that moment, something clicked for me, and it was this. I know the woman who's sitting in front of me is human. I know that she has shortcomings. I know that she has things in her life that aren't perfect. I know she's sinful, though I'm not seeing it right now. If this is the type of love and forgiveness that God's kids are capable of, I think Jesus Christ really might be the God of my wildest dreams. Mm. And that was big because I'd never really faced the unmerited, undeserved grace and forgiveness of God. I'd always sort of caveated little parts of it away into, well, but injustice, this wasn't fair, and then you start the BS machine of our daily lives, which justify everything that happens to us outside of a deep understanding that, it's through him that I have the ability to love and to have empathy and other things. And it started a journey, that on, June 20th of 2009 really started to take some legs. And so it has been an unbelievable adventure with God for the last, 13 plus years. It at times has also scared the hell out of me, quite literally. And it's been really hard and been really wonderful. It's been really scary and very much filled with joy. It's the polarity and the duality of the human experience. And that's really what that program tells me. I live life on life's terms to the best of my ability. I claim spiritual progress, not spiritual perfection. I continue to walk through life on a daily basis, and what my program of recovery tells me is I have a daily reprieve from my alcoholism, contingent upon my spiritual condition. And I really think that's a huge principle to walk your life on, that I have a daily reprieve. I can do this one day at a time, and so when I tie stuff like that out, and there's so many crossovers between what I do on a daily basis, which is to try and walk out my own relationship with Christ, as well as to try and to the best of my ability to help others. And so when you look at it and you kind of go, I can do this one day at a time, that's not first of all, it's not a Rustin Rossello idea. That's not an AA idea. We go back to some, call it, source documents on that, back to Matthew 6, where it's real simple. Sufficient for the day are its worries, tomorrow will worry for itself. Mm-hmm. I got all the worry I need today. And so when this program tells me to live life on life's terms and to take it a day at a time, what I am abundantly aware of is if I just handle today has all of the excitement, it has all of the trial, it has all of the triumph that I will ever need in a day. And a big part of the reason I used to drink was I was bored. And I realized when out of a desire to remove discomfort from my life, when I started to remove discomfort, I started to remove trial. And in some ways started to remove triumph. And in a lot of ways started to remove adventure. And a life without adventure is quite boring. When I came back to just, okay, whatever shows up, we're going to deal with just me and God and the support that he's given me around through friends and family, there's plenty of excitement. My life was more exciting than I really could have ever hoped it to be. So we have seen an unbelievable amount of restoration. The Lord has preserved our marriage, first and foremost on the foundation of his love, but in that foundation was my wife's faithfulness to God, because to be honest, our marriage was no longer in my hands. I had forfeited that right. And the Lord answered her prayer. He gave her complete permission to leave, and he had changed my heart. So, hey, change his heart or get me out of this marriage.
Wow.
He gave her both.
Yeah.
Hey, you have a complete permission to leave. You can get out of this marriage. And by the way, Jaime, I have changed his heart. And now I leave it to you, my daughter, to decide which journey you want to take. Which adventure do you want to be on? And of course, for those who will watch this and maybe have a steeped and potentially rigid view of God's sovereignty, which I hold, and God knew which journey she'd take. And the resources were already there and available. But it certainly didn't feel like that to her. Mm-hmm. She sought God. Of course, he motivated her, moved her, and there's some obvious human challenge with how we do that. But he answered both prayers and said, yeah, this isn't an or. This is a both and. Mm-hmm. I've done both. You have a choice. And whichever journey you take, and she chose what I would call the road less traveled. And it has been a wild ride. The journey for the two of us has been nothing short of both miraculous and gut-wrenching. Walking through that type of pain. Even if she had walked away, we'd have still walked through an ocean of pain. But walking through the type of pain that restoration requires has been unbelievable. So she is assuredly my hero. And we, it's not a Disney movie, it's not. And then they got married, and the presumption being, and there were no problems, and the kingdom kind of rolled on forever. It's a rocky, crazy road, right? Marriage is hard. Two selfish people doing a selfless thing, and that's tricky.
Yeah. Wow. Rustin, forgive my pause, brother, but that's an amazing story, and I know our listeners could feel the emotion there, and that was just very powerful. And kind of how you talked about to the Disney movie, what came to my mind was so many people live a Disney movie on the outside, or it looks like, we'll post on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and it will look like a Disney movie to others.
Yeah.
But it's never the case. We're all sinful creatures, and that's just how it is. And so God makes it perfect, though, and that's obviously what happened with you. And yeah. I would like to ask so in that 13-year time period of where we are today, I would think too, now that being in AA continuously, and then now being the campus pastor of one of the largest churches in Scottsdale Bible, some would consider it a mega church. I don't know if there's a certain amount of people that qualify that.
Yeah. At the top of the list of things I'm not worried about would be that distinction.
Exactly, right. So how was that transition of still going, Rustin, you're still going to AA meetings, and now you're the campus pastor of this large organization. So I would assume there would be some almost identity. I'm misplacing the word, but for kind of like, who am I, right? Or maybe people would say that about yourself. And so how did you kind of wrestle and overcome that?
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways, we all deal with it differently, but I think men in particular really wrestle with a massive fear of failure. And at times we can really wrestle with the concept of the imposter syndrome of if everybody only knew. In a lot of ways, it was a burden to some degree to try and figure out how to re-articulate even my understanding of myself. So much has changed because alcohol really does become kind of an an almost unquantifiable identifier. It's just woven into everything. It is all of what I do. To be awake is to be drinking or be thinking about drinking. I mean, it's a weird life for sure, which is why it takes a fairly weird solution to get into it. Complete abstinence is a pretty wild thing to observe, particularly in American culture right now. Mm-hmm. So as I started to walk forward, I had to start really dipping into God's grace and restoration to re-understand this is going to be somewhat of a almost primordial concept of who I was designed to be, not who I currently was. God had given me giftings and abilities and things, and I'd always just used anything that God had ever given me to the benefit and the pleasure of myself. So whatever it was that was the thing, I would always just use it for me and to make me look better and to make me. And I think so many times when people think about how do we please God, it has to hurt. It has to be painful for me. It has to be costly of me. And at times that is true. To sacrifice at times, just very much following in the bloody footsteps of Christ, it costs us. And that's certainly representable through the scriptures. It's easy to see that. But at other times, there are realities that God has designed us with certain things, certain gifts, certain abilities. And in the midst of those things, for me to live those things out is pleasing to him. And it is quite fulfilling for me in a non-selfish way. Like, if you just think about an engineer who designs a mechanism to little device to take 3 steps and do a backflip, take 3 steps and do a backflip, take 3 steps and do a backflip. When it does that, it's pleasing to the creator. Multiply that onto a quantumly more complex, finite, infinite exchange. I mean, there's just, obviously this analogy falls apart somewhere along the way, but at its root level, what the analogy says is that when creations do things that the creator intended, it is pleasing to the creator. That is assuredly true of a God who loves his creation. So there were certain things that as I started to function more in God's design for me and less in all of my character defects, and to start to, again, through like the process of me being made to look more like Christ each day, never fully reaching that journey's end, I could now start to function in a little more freedom how I was designed to function. And again, you know me better than certainly any of our listeners will, but so trust my heart that this is not a braggadocious moment, but it's the point where you go, a gift of gab that was always used, kind of an outgoing, extroverted personality that was always used to bring me, appreciation. I'm funny. You like me. Now started to get turned around to be able to encourage someone in a tough moment. And one of the things, like you said, where you go, kind of alluding to, you didn't say it this bluntly, but I will. How does a guy who woke up as an adulterous alcoholic on a bathroom floor become a pastor in a church of thousands of people? Like, walk me through the hopscotch on that journey. And I think the reality is that, and this is one of the things that I am profoundly grateful to Scottsdale Bible for. They let me tell my story. And we're not necessarily a church that everybody would go, oh yeah, Scottsdale Bible, the place that really gets into the nitty gritty of life. Like, right. We're a real big church at Miller and Shea, and for years have carried a reputation of being pretty buttoned up, pretty cleaned up, pretty conservative, and not real messy. So to have, at the time, a 27-year-old alcoholic with a battered marriage story show up and start to be invited into the family, and volunteering with a great deal of oversight led to an internship, led to seminary, led to leading a college group or being involved here, there, and you look at it 13 years down the road, and I'm just so far into bonus territory for a guy who should have been dead 13 plus years ago. Wow. At his own hand and on a bathroom floor. And so you really do, you go, how did it happen? I couldn't tell you. I mean, I can tell you what happened. But the how is, it's little heart changes along the way, and a scared to death guy who was so afraid to die that he was willing to do whatever God kind of asked him to do. And I still fight him all the time on stuff, but I tend to throw more tantrums than I tend to say no. I tell people often in sermons, I don't wait well. I tend to wait in tantrum. I don't wait in patience and faith. Oh, the Lord's going to come through. It's me and the Lord fight. He always wins, but we fight. And I'm not ever proud of the fact that I'm not more faithful. But faith is a gift, and some people have it in abundance. And my quotient for faith is not anywhere near as high as my wife's. And so I fight often with the Lord to like, I'm uncomfortable now. I actually don't care that you're coming through later for me. And then he usually kind of pins me to the ground and keeps me in the game long enough to see, oh, you're coming through. Okay. All right. I'm still in here, and I'm never going to quit, but I'm going to be pretty pissed along the way. So, I work hard to try and change that, but it is a default functionality I'm not proud of, but I am working on. And so again, spiritual progress, that's an area, there's no spiritual perfection in that area of waiting. So I think if that very roundabout and probably in a lengthy way touches on all the details of the facets of that question, it's been a wild ride. It's been a very circuitous journey to, what you would say, suicidal and drunk on a bathroom floor, to, the teaching pastor at a large church, and the part I probably would have never believed, and loving every minute of it. That's not something you could have sold me on. I was walking away from a life that had some problems, but generally was pointed in a really good direction, other than my shortcomings in some of these areas, morally and maritally. But the life was headed in the right direction, and I look back and go, "Gosh, that thing was going nowhere." And I love what I get to do today. As early as this morning, getting to sit down and respond to a friend who's just in a desperate place with alcohol. I get to have those conversations today. And some of my darkest moments have earned me a horrible privilege to be there in the midst of those moments. It's a total privilege, and the moments are horrible.
Wow.
So.
Wow, Rustin, dropping bombs. That's profound. And I think we have enough time to start winding things down. And so if I could ask you 3 final questions. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the content of our podcast, but you have additional real estate investing questions, I'm happy to answer those questions for free. Head over to redseacapitalgroup.com and book an appointment with me. Not only am I the host of the show, but I am actively buying and already own properties across the U.S. So feel free to schedule a time that works best for you. Visit redseacapitalgroup.com to book your appointment today.
Yep.
The one being, if you can recommend a book to our listeners,
Sure.
What would that be?
Tim Keller is probably one of my favorite pastors and authors, and he wrote a book that's amazingly simple, but incredibly powerful. It's called The Prodigal God, and it is basically an extremely biblical but very approachable walk through the prodigal son parable in Luke 15. And for me, I read it early in sobriety, and I continue to pick through it over the years. It's just a great look at all of these different facets of that passage. But what it keys on, and this is what I feel like is so hard, particularly for guys like me who really prodigaled, I didn't really have a concept for a loving God. In fact, it was AA that reintroduced me to it. And then walking back into church, it happened to be Scottsdale Bible, that cemented it and really discipled me in it. But it was AA where I walked back into, and they said, quite literally, "We serve a loving God. May you find him now." He loves me. He loves me. He loves me. That's right. He loves me. That's hard to imagine, but he loves me. This book really does a good job of focusing on the Father in that passage, and it is just a beautiful walk. What he does with the gospel over the last, call it 30 pages of that book, is about as good as it gets, in my opinion. So strong recommendation there. Whether you've ever been to church and you're just going, I need to re-understand God's love for me. Whether you've never set foot in one and you go, okay, what are all these people clamoring about? If you approach it objectively, what does the love of God look like? It looks like the Father in that passage. Like, what does the God of the Bible look like? It looks like the Father in that passage. And that's the exact question Jesus is answering. What's the kingdom like? Well, it's like this. Lost sheep. He tells the story of the parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, and lastly, the parable of the lost son. And the whole point is the dad. The dad's the point of the story, and that's what the love of God looks like. So, great book. Highly recommend it.
Good. I love Tim Keller. That's a good one. And Rustin, if people want to learn more about you and maybe SBC, maybe upcoming events, what's the best place for them to do that at?
One of the benefits of being a slightly larger church is the fact that we're not hard to find. We have 4 campuses. So we've got one in Fountain Hills, one up on Dynamite, one on Cactus and 25th, and then our largest campus sits at Shea and Miller. So we kind of have Scottsdale somewhat, surrounded in that area. We're here every week. We always kind of joke on Christmas and Easter. Hey, for those of you that are here twice a year, just know we're here every week. And so we have services at 9 and 11, and then we have a myriad of other opportunities to engage. Women's ministry, men's ministry. We got stuff for youth that's really fun. We have such great youth programs. I'm proud of our church in that way. So feel free to engage. We're easy to find online, all those things. As far as about me, I'm preaching on a fairly regular basis, average of about once a month, but pretty intensely over a stretch in the summer. So if something that I've said has sort of rung your bell, I'm not hard to find. You can find me on our website. But you can also find me, preaching and stuff. So I'll be up again, not this coming Sunday, but the one after it, February, I think it's 5th. And then again, periodically throughout the year, but pretty intensely for most of 8 weeks in the summer. So okay. Easy to find me there.
Fantastic. And Rustin, if you can share one final thing with our listeners that they can take away from today's show, what would that be?
Yeah, I think, again, I would divide it into a bit of a spectrum. If you have a relationship with God, I think a somewhat scary question, because most of us fear disappointment more than anything, would be, do you have the life you want? And I think that's a question that can lead to some pretty earth-shattering growth. And everybody's like all charged up, whether it's the business world or the fitness world or whatever world we exist in. But everybody's pretty pumped on the word growth. And I think for me, really having like a heart growth, a heart change, rather than like a behavioral change, that at times for me anyway, are hard to sustain. I usually joke, like, I'm not a super disciplined person. You don't land in AA at 27 years old because you moderate well. And so that's right. Moderation is not my gift. But I would just say, asking the question, do you have the life that you want? And then as a follow-up, if you don't and you've tried, but continue to not get what you want out of life, do you think that God could help with that? After years of fighting him, I finally came back to I left the church with, I got it. I returned with, I'm open to the fact that I don't. And we started to kind of walk that journey out. So all said in that, I would just ask the question, do you have the life that you want? And if not, keep asking the question as you rattle through solutions. For me, the solution was coming back into an understanding of a higher power as I understood him. And that made all the difference. So.
Oh. Wow, Rustin, that hit me. That was, my story as well. So, Rustin, really appreciate your time. I really enjoyed getting to know you more and just having this conversation with you. So thank you for being here.
You bet. Happy to do it.
All right. Everyone, hope you all have a good day. Catch you next time.
It's time to grab your victory. Find us on the web at redseacapitalgroup.com and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Red Sea Capital Group.